Hello everyone, welcome back, and if you are new, welcome in. You are watching and or listening to another episode of the Mindfulness podcast series. So we discuss lifestyle and mental health content here on this podcast, and the theme of this episode is all about time management. So if you guys follow me on my Instagram or on my YouTube, you'd have seen some posts earlier this week around tips on how to manage your time properly. But we are going to discuss that a little bit more in depth today. So I know a lot of us, when we think about time management, we think about that picture perfect ideal world when we have more than enough time to do all the things on our to-do list. But that's not reality, right? It's not realistic, because often what happens to us is we'll create a to-do list or a task list without being able to accurately estimate how long it's going to take you to get a certain project done. So we end up overestimating the time that we have available. So then to compensate for that, we end up going overtime. And then as a result, we end up not being able to get everything done. So the tendency for people to overestimate their ability to complete a certain task within a limited amount of time, or rather the tendency for us to underestimate how long it's going to take us to complete a certain task, is called the planning fallacy. So how do we compensate for the planning fallacy and make sure that we're not overbooking ourselves by thinking that we have more time to do certain things than we actually do, or by thinking that it's going to take us less amount of time to complete a certain task than it's actually going to take? We do that by giving ourselves additional time to get the task done. So if I say, I think it's going to take me 30 minutes to study for this test, I want to give myself 45 minutes or an hour. So by creating a buffer for yourself, it gives you more time to complete the task. So at the end of the day, when we revisit our task list, we have more things checked off. You find that you're able to get more done. And then in addition to that, if you're able to finish a task early, you don't want to just jump right into the next thing. You want to go ahead and take that time, at least part of that time, and spend a couple of minutes taking a break. You can get up, stretch, go for a walk, go use the restroom, maybe get a glass of water or a cup of tea, so that when it's time to come back and refocus, you're able to do that because you've added that extra buffer to your time, and so now you have more time available. Today we're going to talk about the benefits of managing your time well, the consequences of not managing your time, and tips and tools for time management. So when it comes to tips and tools for time management, or when it comes to some of the benefits of managing your time well, one of the most obvious benefits is that it's going to feel like you have more time in the day to get things done because you are managing your time. You're taking the time out to prioritize your tasks and to make sure that you have enough time scheduled to get the tasks done, so you're not overbooked. You're going to feel less overwhelmed, and that's going to result in greater productivity. So those are just some of the benefits of managing your time well. Another benefit is it makes you come off more competent and capable in the eyes of other people. That could be your peers, your employer, your significant other. How well you manage your time shows not just other people, but also it shows you're able to show not just other people, but you're also able to show yourself that you're a reliable person. That when you make plans and commitments, you're able to keep the plans and commitments that you make to other people and to yourself because you've mastered the art of managing and budgeting your time. And when we think about time management, just like any other competency that you could acquire, it's a skill. So the more you exercise those muscles in your brain, right, the more that you take time out to budget your time, the more you become intentional about setting aside part of your day to manage and budget your time, the better you'll get at it, the easier it'll become. So it might feel overwhelming at first because that's not something you're used to. But the more you do it, the more skilled you'll become at managing and budgeting your time. So then what are the consequences of not mastering the art of managing and budgeting your time? I can give you some examples, but first we're going to run through this list. So some of the consequences of not managing and budgeting your time well are showing up late for meetings or interviews, missing out on job opportunities, potential job loss, loss of faith and confidence from other people who had been dependent on you to show up at a certain time for a certain thing, or loss in confidence in yourself because you haven't properly taking the time to budget and manage your time. So you end up having to scramble and you'll feel more scattered. It might be harder for you to keep a tidy home. It might be harder for you to maintain a relationship because you're viewed as being unreliable, because you're not budgeting your time. And as a consequence, sometimes other people feel like you're not respecting theirs. Right? They'll take that personally, the fact that you're not budgeting your time personally, because not only are you being inconsiderate of your own time, but you're also being considerate of the time for someone else who has taken time out of their day to spend time with you. So if we think about the value of our time, right? If you were to attach a monetary value to time, how much is your time worth? Because you can't get it back. And then when you think about how you value your time in relationship to other people, how would someone feel if you just took $20 from them and you can't give it back? They might feel like they got robbed. So if you want to, learning how to manage and budget your time will help keep the people that you care about from feeling like they're being robbed of their time, because you've learned how to show up, how to show up for yourself, how to show up for those around you who love you and enjoy spending their time with you. I'll give you guys a quick example from my own personal life, because managing my time is something that I still have to work on to this day. It's something that I was quite honestly not very good at. It was honestly something that I was not an expert in doing at all for the longest time. But it all kind of came to a boiling point when I was applying for a job maybe 15, 20 years ago. And I came in for this job. I hadn't taken the time to map out the area ahead of time. So I left and I didn't leave the house early, so I got to a job interview late. And this is a time where I was looking at possibly having to leave my apartment, being put out of my apartment because I had lost my job. I was tight on money. I really needed this opportunity. And I get into the interview and I apologize for being late. And the person who was supposed to interview me for the position, it would have been my first salaried position, told me that he could no longer do the interview with me because I was late. Now, mind you, I was maybe like 10, 15 minutes late due to traffic. I called and I said that I was running late. But he said to me, I want you to remember, part of being successful in life is showing up, right? And showing up on time. That he valued his time and wished me good luck with my other interviews. And I didn't have any other interviews for that week. But after that moment, it helped me to shift my perspective on how I viewed other people's time, right? So now when I think about someone else who has made a point of taking time out of their day to spend it with me, I take that seriously. And that story is also to show that no matter where you are on your personal growth and development journey, there's always an opportunity to learn and keep growing. So I learned a valuable lesson that day, and I hope that after listening to this podcast, after watching this podcast, that you've learned something valuable too. So what are some tools that we can use to help us manage and budget our time more efficiently and effectively? The first thing that I had to learn to do for myself to help me budget my time was to create boundaries. You can't do everything all the time. And I found myself in this people-pleasing, like helper, mothering type role even before I had my daughter, where I wanted to make sure everything was taken care of for everyone else. So anytime someone needed something, I would drop whatever I was doing and go cater to that individual. And it was not just sucking up my time because I'd stopped what I was doing to take care of whatever someone else had mentioned that they needed help with. It was also forcing me to continually engage in context switching. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term context switching, but studies show that when you're doing a certain activity and you stop doing that activity to do something new and you return back to it, your mind has to go through this processing period. So if we think about our minds as being computers, it's like opening a bunch of apps up on your computer, and then instead of closing them because you're not complete with the task, you're starting a new one. So then you have to start the new task, close all the apps from that task, and then go back. So that time that it takes you to adjust is wasted time. Whereas if you'd waited till you finished what you were working on to start a new activity, you don't have to deal with that. You don't have to deal with that additional time that it takes you to adjust from starting a new task that's not related to what you were originally working on. And some other tools that you can use to help you budget your time, in addition to having boundaries, making sure that you finish tasks that you start, is task batching. So you might ask, what is task batching? Task batching is when you group all similar tasks together. So if you say, okay, well, I know that I have 5 errands that I need to run this week. And instead of running one errand every day of the week, Monday through Friday, you take one afternoon and you go run all of your errands that afternoon. So you're not driving to the location, driving back home, driving out to the same location, especially if they're within close proximity of each other. You can save time that way, and then you can avoid context switching as much. Or if you're reading emails, for example, you want to set a couple of times during the day where you're just focused on answering emails. So you're not constantly working on a report, checking your email, like working on financial statements, then stop, check an email every time it comes in, or somebody comes and asks you for something, dropping what you're doing to take care of whatever that person needs. Listen, write it down. And if it's not urgent, if it's not an emergency, you have time set aside on your daily docket to come back to those tasks so that you're not constantly context switching, and you look up at the end of the day and you don't have to worry about wondering where your time went. It's easier for you to focus because you're sticking to one task until it's done. Very quickly, I wanted to go over with you guys some of the tips that I discussed earlier this week around tools for time management, and there are 5 of them. The first one is to create a to-do list. So I made a video earlier this year that talks about throwing away your to-do list and instead creating a template for yourself, or instead creating a schedule for yourself where you say, I am going to focus on doing this task for this amount of time. But I think the key here is to remember that when you create your to-do list, we're just not working on something for an infinite amount of time, right? We're saying, these are the 5 things that I want to get done during the day, knowing that when you set your time limits later, you're going to add additional time onto that task so that you have enough time to check as many boxes off as possible, if not all of them, by the end of the day. That brings us to tip number 2. tip number 2 is all about prioritizing your tasks, right? You're prioritizing what's urgent, what needs to be done right away, and then when is your optimal time for productivity? When are your optimal work hours? If you find that you're most productive in the morning, then you're going to want to do those important tasks, those tasks that are urgent or maybe very difficult for you to complete earlier in the day, so you can make sure that you get those done. And then tip number 3 is around setting time limits. So once you've created your list of things that you need to get done during the day, you want to prioritize those lists. What is urgent, what needs to be done first, and then what needs to be done first according to your most productive time of the day for your personality type, whether that's in the morning or in the evening. Then we want to go ahead and set our time limits, right? Because we don't have an infinite amount of time in the day, and you don't want to spend all day or several hours on one task, and then you look up and you can't do anything else, or you spent too much time focusing on one thing. Tip number 4. Tip number 4 is to remember to take breaks. And this is something that it took me a very long time to learn. But ultimately, like, I know I keep going back to this, but thinking of your brain as a computer, you don't want to just leave it running all the time with all of the apps open. You'll end up needing to reboot. And if you don't give yourself a break, your body, your brain will force you to take a break. It will take a break for you, and then you really won't be able to get anything done. And that can come in the form of a hospital visit. It can come in the form of you being sick and out of work for a couple of days. But we want to make sure that we give ourselves that time, right? And I would say to not spend more than 1 hour working without taking a break. So that can be 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10, 15 minutes break at minimum. So it allows you to be more efficient and productive while you're working. Another thing I had to teach myself too is that I couldn't spend more than 8 to 10 hours a day working if I wanted it to be quality work. Because for so long in my professional career, I would spend 8 to 10 hours at the office, then come home and work, and then you end up having to do things over again because your mind's tired. So we talked about before, if you don't give yourself a break, your mind will take a break for you, and then you end up either burnout, exhausted in the hospital, or with work that's subpar because you haven't taken the time to rest and recharge. And then lastly, tip number 5. Tip number 5 is around scheduling an appointment with yourself to budget your time. I know a lot of people like to take life as it comes and be in the moment, but chances are, if you're listening to this video, something isn't working. It needs to change. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you're not taking all the information that's stored in your brain, or a lot of that running tasks that you have in your brain, and putting it onto paper, it's distracting you. Right behind the scenes, you're thinking about it. And it's keeping you from being present in the moment. It's keeping you from being present in the moment when you're having conversations with people, from being present when you're working on other things, because you constantly have this task list in the back of your mind. But then when you get that out on paper, when you get that into your computer and you attach a schedule to it, when you take a moment to schedule and block out your time to complete certain tasks, then you can set boundaries. Because you know, oh, so-and-so needs this report. Oh, I'm supposed to be here. Do I have time for this appointment? Yes or no. And it's easy to tell because you have taken a moment, because you have been diligent about budgeting your time. It's easy for you to tell when you're available and when you're not. And at the same time, when it's time for you to take a break, when it's time for you to take care of yourself, you know that you can enjoy that time because you've made room for it. Right? You've been intentional about taking care of yourself. and prioritizing yourself and your time. I love you guys. If you have any tips or tricks to add, please feel free to message me, leave a comment, let me know. Or if you have a question, please let me know that as well. I always love hearing from you. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Bye, guys.